So I just wanted to feel like I wanted to do this video as an inspiration, and I'm gonna be talking about the whole Prince and Michael Jackson feud from back then in the early '80s, and why the pop rivals at the time hated each other, and then also after this it's gonna be in a line because the whole Michael Jackson biopic release date trailer is gonna come out next year, so I will be talking about that also. But anyways, let me get back to this topic at hand. So here's the reasons why the pop rivals hated each other. They both revolutionized music in their own unique ways, and during the MTV fueled era of the 1980s, Michael Jackson and Prince became the biggest pop stars pop music has ever seen. Not to mention the huge strides they made for black artists within the music industry, dominating the pop charts, which are very enjoyed by white audiences. They produced a combined 30 top 10 hits between them, and 10 of those songs reaching number one. When Michael Jackson did Normal Shop and Deserted Supermarket Friends, which just established My Dream, and why did Prince change his name to a symbol? And then, of course, with Thriller coming out, Thriller will go on to become the best selling album of all time. Seeing Michael Jackson push the possibilities of music videos within it, with Purple Rain, Prince also became the first artist since the Beatles to have a number one album, single, and movie at the same time. They weren't just enormously successful on a commercial level. However, they were multi-dimensional musicians that broke boundaries and changed the face of music as we know it. And because of their success, the artists would also keep a close eye on one another and what they evolved from a pop star rivalry into a full-blooded feud. So why did Michael Jackson and Prince fall out? Here's all you need to know. And how did the feud have began? With both artists being ultra competitive characters, the huge success meant that they were bound to be rivals, but they were rivals from afar. From the beginning. The King of Pop was renowned as the world's greatest entertainer, whereas the Purple One was considered by far the greater musician, both being black artists who transformed what it meant to be a pop star, but they're bound to be comparisons. But Michael Jackson did not take too kindly to the notion, reportedly revealed, I don't want to I don't like to be compared to Prince at all, and I improved myself since I was really little. He feels like my opponent, and I hope he changes because, boy, he's going to get hurt. What started out as a professional rivalry between two generational talents quickly turned personal. What happened during the infamous James Brown performance, you might ask? And in what the first time Michael Jackson and Prince would meet, it would also be the start of their bad blood. In a 1983 show, James Brown would invite both stars to perform on stage with him as they both were in attendance in the crowd. MJ joined Mr. Dynamite for a brilliant duet, which drew a standing ovation from the crowd. Shortly after, he encouraged Brown to get Prince up on stage too. And at the little time Prince fame paled in comparison to Michael's, despite scoring hits with 1999 and Little Red Corvette. So he wanted to strut his stuff because his stuff the biggest stars, but it didn't go to plan. Prince didn't manage to wow the crowd, and he attempted to swing from a prop lamppost beside the stage when he saw him tumble onto the floor. And in some rediscovered recordings, Jackson heard his saying he made a fool of himself. He was a joke. People were running and screaming, and I was so embarrassed, and it was all on video. And to hammer his superiority home, Jackson brought the video footage to ensure the footage was never co-signed to the history books. Hey, what's going on? And then Prince and Michael Jackson ever worked together, you might ask. Despite 2 years of bickering and competition, including a legendary ping pong match between the two, they nearly ended up working together. Prince wanted Mike to do a duet with him on Bad, so his producer Quincy Jones set up a secret in the summer of 1986, and Prince was clearly interested in collaboration, but given that both artists were intense control freaks, he didn't like the fact that it billed as Jackson's project and concerned Michael was again making him look inferior. Michael sent Prince an early demo of Bad, which Prince re-recorded virtually everything and sent it back, and it didn't go down too well. And Prince repeatedly called Michael a Camille or Camille to his face in an attempt to humiliate him in front of his peers. Years later, in an interview with comedian Chris Rock, Prince joked the first line of that song was "Your butt is mine," and now I said, "You're not gonna sing that to whom? Because you're not singing it to me, and I sure ain't singing it to you. So right there, we got a problem." And even though the collaboration never came to fruition, and he turned down a starring role in the Bad music video, which that went to Wesley Snipes, Prince reportedly turned to Jackson and his management after the meeting and graciously stated, "It will be a big hit even if I'm not on it." For the charity single "We Are the World," Prince also refused to contribute, given that Lionel Richie had co-wrote the song with none other than Michael Jackson, and was their long-running feud heightened by the media. In many ways, yes, there was always been a desire to pit successful artists against one another, even though that they're not closely related. And look no further than the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, for instance. Any sniff of sly dig MJ or Prince would have given given each other, the media would pounce over it. But they both knew that they had to work publicly in their favor. Michael loved to leak stories to create publicity stunts, and "I want my whole career to be the greatest show on earth," he told his managers. And though the rivalry snowballed in the media, both artists challenged each other, and they both seriously disliked each other. In the recordings for his 1988 autobiography Moonwalk, Jackson slammed Prince, saying, "He was so rude, one of the rudest people I've ever met. He's been a very mean and nasty to my family. There's no smoke without fire," but ultimately it seemed like both artists had major egos that they couldn't overcome. Even towards the end of Michael's life, as he prepared for his residency in London's O2 Arena, he still had Prince at the front of his mind, claiming that if I'm not there to receive these ideas, God might give them to Prince. And did Michael Jackson and Prince ever bury the hatchet? Sadly, it seemed that Michael Jackson remained in battle with Prince until his death on the 25th of June 2009 during the 25th anniversary of Purple Rain. In the wake of Michael's passing, everyone was keen to get Prince's perspective on the rival's demise. He made no public statement, but according to interviewers, he was deeply affected. And in one interview on French television, Prince simply stated, "It was always sad to see someone you loved, and in 2014 declined to talk about the saying, 'I don't want to talk about it, I'm too close to it.'" And in tribute, Prince even began covering Jackson's "Don't Stop Till You Get Enough" when touring, to the amazement of his fans. And similarly to Michael's premature death, Prince would later die in 2016 while in the midst of a creative rejuvenation. Though he clearly had disdain for one another, but both Michael Jackson and Prince were more alike than they admit, sharing the same kinds of struggles and achievements and traveling similar journeys to the top of pop music. They were both talents and defined their generation. Yeah, so these are the things that transpired during the whole feud. Now, my thoughts pretty much goes to simplicity is, it happens to a lot of the popular acts in that time frame and in that era where, like they just said in particular, those in Rolling Stone with groups and bands, in particular. And then even if going into other subgenres, not just in pop music, but R&B, they always had these conversations of who is the greatest R&B artist and everything like that. But in here, I feel like at the time both have revolutionized 80s music and revolutionized what MTV was putting out the way and everything like that. So it makes it more well known that both had something to say, and both were capable of redefining an era of hit making, of chart topping and hit making successful albums, and also just had a really great breaking point, with Mike with the Jackson Five, and then eventually leaving the Jackson Five and Berry Gordy and Motown. That was probably the best signing that they could have ever done at the time. And then with Prince, he had Morris Day, he had you know the Time, the group, the Time, and then Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. If you, for those of you who didn't know, and eventually they end up breaking off because of some music royalties and some songwriting credits that they didn't get credited for. That is a thing where Prince was relatively known to have an ego, and similar with Mike. They both were pretty much known to have egos, and both let that kind of get in the way to what could have been, at the end of the day, could have been something that they both would have been on records at that time, and even later on in their career, had a long ongoing feud, which I would have think they could have just solved with just either a phone call, which either seeing each other at a concert or a performance. Could have just had a long conversation, a long talk, and it could have been died down. And I feel like the media kind of pushed them to that brink and created a unnecessary feud that wasn't really so much in there and in line. And then also, I feel like both really had issues with their labels, with their companies, and I feel like that doesn't get highlighted or get talked about enough, in the parts in the midst of. And I always say this to artists too. You always gotta look at your royalties and look at your masters, look at your songwriting credits, and also own your own stuff. Do not sign your way over to these big major labels and big major companies, because at the end of the day, they're gonna try to steal the art, and they try to steal the artist, steal that part of the culture, like they always do, because these labels want to try to make bread and want to try to make the marketing brand and the publishing off of it, rather than caring about the art, or rather than caring about the actual feeling of it. And so those are the things that I would say played a big major role in this ongoing feud. And also because, like I said, both majorly had at the time had egos, and I always thought that Mike was a better dancer, a better entertainer, and live on stage performer than Prince. That's just how I feel, and that's just how I feel at the time, and how I feel now to this very day. But I always felt like Prince was slightly more of a better musician, because not only he could play every instrument, he did a lot of songwriting for many different artists. He signed some of the best to ever do it. He collaborated with some of the greatest performers in Parliament and Morris Day and Jimmy Jam, Jerry Lewis. He collaborated with some of the greatest producers and artists to ever do it. And also he was able to do it on his own, playing and absolutely having the best electric guitar solo performance that you will ever see. That is something that's insane. I don't think that ever could be duplicated. It made people like Eric Clapton, and for example, just go absolutely insane. So that just goes to show you how great of a live performer and an instrumentalist Prince was. He just did a lot and did everything at that time. From 1999, and his self-titled debut in '79. And then of course moving into Purple Rain, and then the first one of the only few artists to ever have a number one single, album, and movie all at the same time. It's just that will never be duplicated at all. That could never be duplicated by any of the artists that's even coming out now. So those are just rips and raps. And then with Mike, of course, Thriller was the only album to chart on the Billboard Top 500. I mean, the Billboard 200 greatest Billboard 200 albums at over 369 weeks, and was only and one of the only few artists that had multiple albums in the all-time 500 greatest albums of all time, according to Rolling Stone. That was an accomplishment feat that nobody could ever do. Nobody could ever duplicate. And so yeah, you gotta give a lot of credit to both of them for that success, for their success and redefining an era of what they've done. So yeah, those are my thoughts about the whole feud between both of them. You guys tell me what you think down in the comment section down below. Uh, I will be covering and talking about the I will be covering and talking about the Michael Jackson biopic movie. Um, Probably later on today or tomorrow. You'll probably see a video with that. So be on the lookout for it. But yeah, anyways, I'm out. Peace.